Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Filter. On this show, we recognize that the world can be a confusing place to live in. And so what I seek to do on this show is to equip you to live with biblical clarity in our confusing world, so that you can face the chaos of life with wisdom, integrity, and courage. Today, I'm glad to be welcoming on a guest that I've been wanting to have for a while, and we were able to make it work out. I'm glad to welcome Brett McCracken. Brett is Senior Editor and Director of Communications at the Gospel Coalition. He's also the author of several books, including The Wisdom Pyramid, Uncomfortable, Grave Matters, and Hipster Christianity. Brett and his wife live in Santa Ana, California, with their 3 children. Brett, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Aaron.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to have you on. As I was telling you before, I've really enjoyed your insights on movies, your movie reviews, and other writings that you've had at the Gospel Coalition for several years now. And so it's great to have you on. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, you had an article come out a couple weeks ago that caught my eye, that I thought, okay, this is a great one that I could reach out to him to have you on for, and it was about war movies. You released it around the time of Memorial Day. We're going to be releasing this one before July 4th for people as a little movie guide for if they want to watch something to go along with the holiday Independence Day. But you released it a little while back, and I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it because I'm a movie enjoyer. I don't consider myself what would be the word for it? I don't consider myself, a critic enjoying I'm not an art film guy. I'm a simple guy. I enjoy action movies, comedy movies, and so on. But I do enjoy film, and so and I enjoy film criticism. So and war movies is one of my favorite genres. But before we get into specifically your article on these war movies, let's just talk about movie watching as a Christian before we get into that, and think about how do we approach that as a Christian. And so what is the value of watching movies as a Christian?
Yeah, good question. I think on one hand, the value is just enjoyment. I think as Christians, we sometimes undervalue that. It sounds wrong to say that it's okay to just enjoy things, but we serve a God who created a beautiful world, and a world for us to enjoy, a world that wasn't just utilitarian, but is full of beauty as well. And he created, and then he rested, right? And he said that it was good. And so I think as his image bearers, it's leisure and enjoyment are ways we actually image God. So we image him by working and being productive and fruitful and stewarding the world, but we also image him by enjoying kind of the world that he made and the creations of other image bearers, which is the arts and things like movies. So I would say at a basic level, like, Christians don't need to feel guilty about enjoying things like movies. But as we all know, movies and pop culture are not just kind of a neutral terrain. There are lots of really bad messages out there in Hollywood stories. There's lots of explicit content that isn't helpful. So I think even though it's generally a good thing to be able to enjoy watching something on Netflix or going out to the movies, we have to be discerning about it, and we have to be careful both with kind of the content in a movie, but also the worldview and kind of what the underlying assumptions are of this film or TV show or whatever we're watching. So yeah, I mean, I think I would say enjoyment and discernment are like things that we need to think about, like, and sometimes the way evangelicals have approached pop culture has gone to one extreme or the other. Like, it's all about discernment, and we have to have this hyper kind of defensive posture where everything is just, potentially harmful, or the other extreme of just kind of too casual, like, well, this is like it's a Disney movie, it's a Marvel superhero movie, like there can't be anything harmful here, so let's enjoy it and let's eat our popcorn and not overthink it. So you have that approach sometimes that Christians take, and then you might have the other like approach where that sucks all the fun out of it, because it's like everything is potentially like the devil behind a bush sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm somewhere in between those, and I think that as I've grown older and hopefully more mature and hopefully more wise as a film critic, I've actually become a little bit more conservative and just in terms of what I will personally watch and expose myself to. And I think part of that came with becoming a dad and having children and just being more aware of like, what am I modeling to my kids? I want to err on the side of probably avoiding potentially harmful things rather than this like free-for-all of like, I'll watch anything and everything, and any like HBO show I'm going to watch, I basically like, there's fewer and fewer things that I'll subject myself to the older I get, because life is too short to fill your mind with toxic content.
Yeah.
Right? There's plenty of good and true and beautiful content out there to enjoy. So why spend your pennies in potentially polluted kind of terrain?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I'll catch myself talking about, like a TV show or something that I really loved, that was a fun watch, that was interesting, and I'll be talking to a friend about it, and then I would say, oh well, but they did have this in it, and later reflect on that and think, if I have to add that in, that little warning, was it even worth for me to watch it in the first place? I've caught myself thinking that before.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good process to go through and think through that as Christians. Like, how many caveats do we are too many when we're like watching a show? Like, where does the balance of like, well, it has good themes and it has good acting and it has good this and this and this, but it also has this really bad stuff and this, explicit content. Like, what is that balance of something being worth it because of the quality, artistic quality or thoughtfulness of the movie? And I don't know the answer, right? This is a process I'm constantly going through as a Christian film critic, as someone who like spends a lot of time watching things and looking to discern the ideas and the meat, the substance of a film, but having to subject myself to sometimes unpleasant content in the process of that, it's hard, and I have to be really careful with how I navigate that, and when it's just not worth it to recommend something to other Christians, because it may have some merit and some commendable qualities, but it's just not worth it. So
yeah.
It's a good question to ask.
Yeah, no, whenever you were talking about, so you said there's two sides, entertainment, discernment. And under discernment, you said there's discerning of content and worldviews. Mm-hmm. I think for some in our audience, probably not for a lot in our audience, but for some in our audience, they might be a little confused by those terms and trying to understand how those terms really are referring to two different things in the movie. So can you just explain, and I think this will be a helpful backdrop as we get into talking about specific movies and so on. What do you mean by discerning content and worldview? How are those two different things, obviously interconnected things, that are present in a film that we watch?
Yeah, so what I mean by content is more of the like objectionable content that you might read in like a parent guide, like how many curse words there are, how many sex scenes there are, like what's the level of graphic violence, that kind of, basically what's on the screen that might trip you up as a viewer or might, cause you to stumble as a Christian. That's what I'm referring to with being discerning about content. Now, we also have to be discerning about the story and kind of the ideas in the film, and that's more of the kind of bigger picture, not necessarily what's on screen in any given scene, but the whole package together. What does it add up to? Like, what is the takeaway that the filmmaker wants viewers to have? What are some of the philosophical, theological presuppositions that the filmmaker has that we can discern? So I would say of those two types of discernment, the content is easier, right? Because it's obvious. Like, you can watch a film and you can easily count how many F words there are, or how many like scenes of explicit sexuality there are. The discernment on the worldview level is the harder task because it's not always obvious, and you have to sometimes kind of watch a film and then sit back and think about it. And that's the work that I undertake. That's what I see as my contribution as a Christian film critic. I do the work of watching a film, and then like sitting with it and thinking, going a layer deeper than, okay, there's the obvious content and maybe the obvious meaning of a film, but there's sometimes layers of subtlety that we don't pick up as quickly, but are still there, and they still form us, whether we know it or not. So I find this particularly important with kids' movies, actually. As a parent, maybe I'm very alert to this now, but we often think about kids' movies, anything on Disney Plus, for example, as like, well, obviously, like, we don't need to worry about these because they're like rated G, they're rated PG, there's not any like nudity or anything that's going to show up on the screen. And even if the story seems on the surface to be neutral or kind of just a feel-good kind of kid story, I find that a lot of times if you go some layers deeper, there's really problematic kind of worldview assumptions at play that are that our children, as they watch these films, are picking up, over time. And for the generation that was raised on kind of Disney in the 80s and 90s, as I was, I think there's just a lot that has shaped us, in those films that wasn't obvious. So I wrote about this last week with a Little Mermaid review. I don't know if you saw that, but so yeah, that's just one example of like the discernment on the worldview level takes more time. You really have to put your thinking cap on, and I think that goes against the grain of our typical mode of movie watching, which is kind of like go into the theater, have a fun time, and then maybe talk about, did you like it, did you not like it, for 5 minutes as we walk to the car, and then it's done, and then we move on to the next thing. And I just think that posture of consuming really powerful stories, but then like moving on so quickly that we never really think carefully about what was the actual like message that movie was trying to convey. But that can feel like a tension with the enjoyment part, right? Because if enjoying a movie is good, as I'm arguing that it is, some people might be like, well, it's kind of a buzzkill to like have to discuss it, and to really analyze the messages after it. Like, can't we just enjoy The Flash or, Spider-Verse and just be done with that and like go on our merry way? And why do we have to like think so hard about it? So I don't know. That's just my perspective. Is movies shape us whether we want them to or not, and whether we're aware of it or not. And so Christians especially need to be alert to that and think a little bit more carefully about how that happens.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, so I'm into philosophy and apologetics. That's always been my big thing for a long time now. And so whenever I approach art in general, I approach it in a very, the way that I approach it has been heavily influenced by people like Francis Schaeffer and Nancy Pearcey. So I approach it with what you're talking about in mind, which is enjoyment. Like I said earlier, I'm not an art house movie guy. I like Yeah, I'm a simple guy. But at the same time, I do approach art, whether it's movies or other things, with those worldview questions in mind. And for me, that's what makes it even more enjoyable. My favorite movies are the ones that are just great because they're well made, well acted, they have entertainment value and so on, but also touch on some of the deepest themes of life and ask big questions and explore ideas and so on. Those are some of the best. And so yeah, whenever I watch something, especially content that's made for kids that has these subtle messages in it, though the content itself seems innocuous, the worldview themes beneath, I think, are toxic. My friends, and this is going to make some of them really happy that I'm even bringing it up. My friends often laugh at me because I get very worked up over Frozen 2 and that I hated Frozen 2 because I do think, just speaking as a movie, it was a huge step down from the first one. The music wasn't nearly as good. They ruined the best characters and so on. But also, I thought that the message of the first one wasn't phenomenal, but the message of the second one was just absolutely toxic. I thought it was terrible. And so, though my buddies and our friends might see me as a buzzkill every now and then over these things, I do think it's a trait that we should maybe all try to develop, particularly as Christian parents living in a culture that is increasingly growing the distance between our values and theirs.
Yeah, we can't be naive, to the fact that people in Hollywood have actually stated very explicitly that they're making movies for children that have certain ideas in them that they want to become more accepted, right?
Yeah.
So if we suspected that was the case, 10 years ago, now it's like people are actually saying that out loud in Hollywood. So, parents just need to be aware of that and not naive to, every kids movie or any kind of movie being just innocuous entertainment. Most filmmakers, like any artist, has something to say, and they want their work to communicate something that, in their view, is important. So the realm of entertainment is not just this kind of neutral thing. It's very much a battleground of ideas, and whose vision of the good life is going to win out, and that's why this is so important, I think. Yeah,
at the beginning of a lot of y'all's articles on film review, there's a note that y'all add in over at TGC saying something about we're not necessarily recommending every movie that we review, but we review them because they have explanatory power. And I like how y'all put that explanatory power to show what is the driving worldviews of our culture right now.
Yeah, and that speaks to another purpose for why I think Christians should care about pop culture, is not only for the personal enjoyment of it, and not only for the protecting your kids part of it, but just the fact that pop culture is an expression of a culture and its values and its kind of mythologies and its spiritual kind of longings. And if we are called to reach this culture for Christ and to speak the gospel into this culture, then it's helpful, I think, to see how different things in pop culture, whether movies or TV shows or music, it can be really helpful to see, okay, well, there's this trend of this is showing up a lot and this idea, and I think it's just a good fodder for mission and thinking about how the gospel maybe speaks to specific areas where our culture is feeling tension or is expressing longing that they might not be explicitly directing that longing to God or religion or anything like that, but it's nonetheless a real longing that exists, and we as Christians believe we have answers to that in the form of Christ and the gospel. And so I think there's real potential for for our mission in the world by not being pop culture junkies necessarily, but being students of pop culture and aware of it and conversant with it, to the extent that it helps us understand the culture we're trying to reach.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect segue into something I was maybe thinking about us getting into at the end of this, but we'll just briefly mention it now, which is that like the prevalent theme of multiverses in a lot of recent movies. You just wrote an article, I think it's your most recent one, on all these multiverse stories and how they're just all over the place now. They're in Marvel movies and DC movies, and and in others too. How they're all over the place, and a lot of people have pointed out, and my frustration with them was, it's just like it's a cheap writing trick for the writers to be able to lazily throw in other nostalgic characters, to be able to just get away with doing things for the sake of the plot that it would have taken them greater creativity to have to do otherwise. Instead, they just have this trick. Oh, multiverse. Now the story can move along. But you brought out in your article all those frustrations, but also that deeper longing issue that you were referring to just now.
Yeah, I think that I'm always looking for, in a secular age that has kind of done away with God and concepts like heaven, and that leaves a void of meaning, right? People still have a need for meaning in their lives and consolation to their lives if they're going through grief or if they've lost a loved one. If you've stopped believing in heaven, and God, losing a loved one is really, really hard, because what is there? What hope is there? And as I was watching The Flash in particular, and I don't want to get into spoilers or anything, but the plot really hinges on the Flash losing a loved one and feeling the pain of that and wanting to reverse that and wanting to kind of somehow cope with the loss of this character. And the multiverse just becomes this convenient thing where it's like anything is possible in the multiverse. You can switch verses, and someone who dies in one multiverse, well, they're probably living in another multiverse. So there's that hope that we get, right? So I say in my article today that in a sense the multiverse idea is kind of a sci-fi substitute for heaven and the Christian conception of eternity. It's just another way to kind of console ourselves, instead of thinking that this life is all there is, and if a person dies, they're dead, and there's nothing beyond. Well, if we believe in the multiverse, then maybe there's a million simultaneous universes where things end up different, and whatever grief we're going through here in this timeline or in this verse is different somewhere else. So I just think it's an interesting... There's obviously just like pop culture reasons why the multiverse is something Hollywood is really into right now. Like you mentioned, it's a kind of a cheap writing trick to just make whatever you want to happen on screen sort of make sense. So there's those reasons, but I also think that there's a subtle kind of spiritual layer in our culture right now that resonates with the idea of a multiverse. It's a coping mechanism for a very anxious age that we live in, where Gen Z especially, which is the generation that is really like resonating with the multiverse, they've grown up on social media, and they're very anxious about like saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or being canceled and having no hope if their life is canceled. Well, the multiverse, means, well, I could just wake up tomorrow and it could be different in a different universe, and there's this perpetual hope of things they don't hinge on what I do or don't do in this moment, because there's an infinite array of options. And the internet itself, right, has cultivated sort of this like multiverse of different pathways and different communities and different identities that you can have. I think the gender fluidity of our age is related to this, and I didn't write about this in my article, but I was tempted to, because I think there's connections with how the anything goes nature of the multiverse is similar to the anything goes nature of identity today, where you can literally be whoever you want to be, whatever you want to be, and you can change it on a dime if you so desire. So in other words, like, we don't want a world of limits. We don't want a world of kind of a linear, singular universe where what you do really matters because there's no other universe. So this is all we have. So if that's true, then there is a degree to which our anxiety is founded, because my life really matters and my decisions really matter. And if I sin, or if I whatever, like something I do wrong, there are consequences to that. And we maybe don't want that world, but it's the world we have. And I argue that it's actually something that gives our world inherent drama, which is why I find the multiverse movies lacking sometimes in drama, because it's actually more compelling to watch a film where there's limits to what can happen, and you can't just kind of solve a problem by just switching to another universe. If a problem happens, you're stuck with it, and you have to deal with it, and you have to grieve a death as ultimate, because there's no other universe where it doesn't happen. You can't go back in time. You can't,
a story where the stakes are real.
A story where the stakes are real. So it boils down to stakes. And that's something I really focused on in my review. Any good screenwriter in Hollywood would tell you that everything is about stakes. How high are the stakes? And then how is the film communicating that tension of, this is the stake and this is how it has to happen. And the movie hinges on that. And I just think the multiverse kind of removes stakes a lot.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, I think that's a good natural transition into war movies, because in standard war movies, or at least the ones that we're talking about, not ones that are sci-fi, but ones that are historical dramas, they're stories where the stakes are real, and they're also stories where the stakes are always extremely high. They're matters of life and death, and I think that's another one of the reasons that I've always enjoyed this genre, is because it's stories where the stakes are really, really high, and so everything matters, like you said. And so how do you approach watching war movies and evaluating those as a Christian, and thinking through those? What are you looking for?
Yeah, well, it's a good segue talking about stakes, because I think war movies are it's like a genre that really makes the stakes clear, right? This is a life and death battleground. It's in most cases, these are true stories that actually happened in history, so that raises the stakes even more, because what we're watching on screen is kind of symbolizing or acting out real lives, and lives that were cut short in the line of duty. And so you feel the weight of that. And so I think that's one of the reasons why war movies are so popular and universally popular, is they naturally speak to the high stakes of our world, and in this life that we live in, where people there are real battles, and there are real threats and real risks that people have to take in risking their life to protect other people or protect ideals. So that's one of the reasons why I love war movies. It not only is it because I love history, and they remind us of episodes in history that were important, but there's also like a deeper kind of existential resonance with any given war movie. Speaks to this, like the ultimate stakes of this life, and putting yourself in the shoes of a soldier who's like getting off the boat at Normandy, like the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. Man, that's like the most intense moment of humanity I can imagine. Like death, that moment of like, well, my life could be in its final minutes, but I'm going to press on, and I'm going to like run into the battle nonetheless. So war movies just capture those like really heightened kind of human moments of life and death and sacrifice and valor and virtue, right? That's something I talk about in the article, is how beautiful it is to watch the virtue of sacrifice on such vivid display in a selfish, narcissistic world that we live in, which is increasingly so. I think we would all agree that we're increasingly in this kind of like me-centered world where the idea of sacrificing your desires, sacrificing your comfort, sacrificing your life is increasingly just foreign in this culture. It's nonetheless appealing to us, like on a very deep spiritual level. Like we resonate with seeing people lay down their lives for others, and I just think that's interesting. Why is that? And I think as Christians we have answers for that, connected to Jesus and what he said and what he lived, in terms of sacrifice and laying down your lives for others as an act of love. But yeah, it's an increasingly foreign concept in our world.
Yeah. In your article, you list 21 war movies that are worth celebrating, or worth being a part of our celebration of these holidays like Memorial Day and July 4th coming up. Why did you pick these 21? I know that's a hard question because that's like 21 answers to one question. But just I guess if you can give a general one, and then we can go through some of them individually. I've got it pulled up here. Why these 21 films?
Yeah, well, first of all, I should say that even though I released this article on Memorial Day, which is an American holiday, and we're going to release this podcast before 4th of July, also an American holiday, not every film on my list is about an American war or American soldiers. So I'm talking here about war in a universal sense. Although a lot of the 21 films, do focus on America. Some of them don't. And yeah, I mean, why I picked these 21, I think it's mostly just kind of subjective. These are my favorites, and these are ones that I go back to, and I want to show my kids one day when they're old enough, probably. So usually when I make lists like this, one criteria I have in mind is do I have a desire to watch this movie again? If I haven't already watched it, some of them, like The Thin Red Line, I've probably seen a dozen times. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. But some of them I've only seen once. But I might say, yeah, I have a desire to watch that movie again because it was really quality. So that's one of my criteria that I use in general for evaluating a film over time. Is it something I would spend another 2-3 hours of my life sitting with because it has so much value. But another thing that I had in mind with this particular list, because I talk in the introduction about the virtue of sacrifice, kind of what we were just talking about, I was picking movies that really captured that. Some war movies are more cynical, I think, about war, and they just take this very gloomy, war is horrible, and it is, but it just kind of looks at the worst aspects of humanity through war. And I like a lot of those films. I think they have value. But for this list, I wanted to choose movies where they don't shy away from the horrible aspects of war, but they also highlight the valor and the virtue that is often on display. And friendship, camaraderie,
because I think you have All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a pretty powerful anti-war film.
Yes.
So that one definitely highlights the brutality.
Yeah, that was one where I was on the fence of whether I should include it, because it does fall in that category of like war is pretty horrible. Like there's not there's not much redeemable about war, but it does really, like, the characters are they're good friends, and they care for one another, and they sacrifice for one another, even though they're in this really bad situation that the film is super clear, is kind of meaningless, right? Mm-hmm. The end results of that movie is just a depressing awareness of how World War I was really futile in a lot of ways. It was just a battle of inches, over many years. And yet, even in a bad situation, virtue can be on display, and I think it is in All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah. So one of your movies that's on there that's not about an American war is Master and Commander. And I actually just rewatched that one the other night. I forgot that it was on your list. A couple nights ago, we finally, for once, got our kids to bed on time. And so I looked at the clock and I thought, I have time for a movie tonight. I'm going to watch a movie.
Magic hour for parents if you can get the kids down.
Yeah. So I thought, I'm going to watch a movie. And I knew that one was streaming for free on Apple TV Plus right now. And so it's been over a decade since I saw it for the first time. So I wanted to watch it again. And that is just a classic.
It came out 20 years ago this year, I think. I think this year is the 20th anniversary. So I've thought about writing something entirely on that film on the occasion of its 20th anniversary, because it is one of my favorite films. I think
it's amazing.
It'd probably be in my top 10 of all-time favorites.
Yeah.
It's remarkable, and it's so much more than just a war movie. So I think sometimes we can reduce a film by its genre. You put a film in a genre, and it can't be more than that. But that movie is just about so much. Even the relationship between Paul Bettany's character and Russell Crowe, it's like this interesting kind of faith and science. There's that subtext going on, which is so interesting.
It goes over friendship, like we talked about, sacrifice. Duty is a really, really heavy theme in that one. Very, very explicit too. You don't have to be like a keen observer to catch it. And weighing duty with other responsibilities in life. Wonderful characters. So well done. I mean, like you said, 20 years ago, and you watch it today, and that movie has held up.
It holds up for sure.
Yeah, it does not seem 20 years old.
Yeah, beautiful soundtrack too. I love a movie that like I love a movie that's gritty and kind of like, manly, but it has like Mozart and Bach and like classical elegance to it. There's just something really dignifying about that.
One thing that I noticed that's missing on your list is any movies about the Revolutionary War. And I'm wondering, because we're doing this before July 4th, and I'm wondering, is that because there aren't really many good movies about the Revolutionary War? Because honestly, I struggle to think of one.
Yeah, I had the same kind of question when I was assembling the list, because I wanted to represent all the major American wars at least. And the only one I thought about was The Patriot. But I'm just not like, I enjoyed it when it came out, but I don't think it holds up as well.
It's a great movie for what it is. It's certainly entertaining. But like, I wouldn't put it. It wouldn't feel right to put it on the same list with movies like Master and Commander, 1917, Dunkirk, Saving Private Ryan. Like these other movies are amazing movies. They rank high in
quality of a list by throwing in a slightly less quality. So, it's still good for sure. I think it's an enjoyable film, but
it's not the most accurate either. There's a lot of embellishment. It is a little cliche and cheesy at times.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was hoping that maybe you knew of another good Revolutionary War movie, because all I can think of is The Patriot, which, look, if that's all we got, I'll take it. But
Yeah, I mean, there's like mini series like John Adams, and there's some.
yeah, John Adams is okay.
There's some things like that, but I couldn't. Yeah, that's like a gap, in the war movie canon. Maybe there's a opportunity for some great director to make the definitive Revolutionary War movie.
Yeah, I wish. I mean, I'm hoping for it. I really wish that some very passionate, creative director out there would take one of like Ron Chernow's biographies and turn it into a miniseries, like his Washington biography or his Hamilton biography. I mean, those would be incredible. Just take a piece out of one of those. Yeah.
There's no shortage of source material out there that could be adapted in a compelling way.
Yeah. You do. There's a lot of World War II movies on there.
I had to restrain myself with World War II because I could easily have done 20 World War II movies. But
yeah, well, I'm sure just in terms of like what's available to you within the genre, I'm sure World War II dominates the genre of war movies. You have Dunkirk on there, Thin Red Line, Saving Private Ryan, Flags of Our Fathers, and Letters from Iwo Jima. Oh, okay. So I'd skipped over that. So you've got two.
I kind of include that as a pair because it really was Clint Eastwood intended for those two to be like a pair.
Okay. And then Hacksaw Ridge. So I've seen all of those except the Thin Red Line and then the Eastwood pair. You said the Thin Red Line is one of your favorites. So tell us about that one and why you think that's an important one to watch. I see it's a Terrence Malick.
Yeah, so that's why it's probably my favorite war film is it's Terrence Malick directed it, which means if you know Terrence Malick, it's like stylistically unlike any other war movie. So it's very distinct in its style, and I think that frustrates some people who watch it.
Yeah.
Because it's not like a straight history. It is adapted from a novel, The Thin Red Line by James Jones, I think, is the author. So it is trying to tell some sort of story about a real event, the Battle of Guadalcanal, but it's mostly just kind of a poetic meditation on war, and not only war in a just kind of surface level sense, but in a theological sense. So Malick is a Christian, and all of his films are interesting to watch because he references theology and the fall. So the Thin Red Line kind of starts in a Garden of Eden type scene in the jungles of Guadalcanal, and it starts with these questions that are in the voiceover of like, how did we lose this paradise? Like, where did evil come from? Like, why did sin enter the world? And the whole movie is like wrestling with that and the problem of evil and what war really brings to the surface, which is that we live in a fallen world, and this is not Eden anymore. This is not paradise, and war is a very bloody reminder of that. And yet the film has this beautiful sense of longing for the garden, right? Longing for paradise to be found again, and for there to be this shalom, of no more kind of killing each other. And that it sounds kind of like John Lennon-esque, like no more war, no more blah, blah, blah. But in the hands of Terrence Malick, it's just really meaty and substantive and beautiful. So highly recommend that you watch that and turn up the volume and devote 3 hours of uninterrupted time to watch it, because it's a powerful film to experience for the first time. I've tried some Terrence Malick, and I've got to say he's difficult for me. I rented The Tree of Life one time and made it about 20 minutes in. Yes.
And just had to stop. I couldn't.
That's a hard one to start with, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. And then I watched A Hidden Life. I did enjoy that one. But still, he just doesn't I know you love them, and I've got other friends that love them, and I know a lot of people do, and I think that's great, and I can understand why, but I just think for me, it's difficult. I've always thought it'd be funny if Terrence Malick would do a Batman movie, like Terrence Malick's Batman, where Batman just like broods over a raining Gotham City, whispering the whole time. Like nothing ever really happens. He just mopes around in his suit.
Well, it's funny because like Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, Superman reboot. I don't know when that came out, probably like a decade or 15 years ago. But the trailer, people like made a big deal about how like much it looked like it was going to be a Terrence Malick ripoff, because it did have that kind of ethereal kind of like voiceover aesthetic. And I don't think the film itself ended up being very Malick-esque, but so it's sort of been attempted in the superhero genre, the Malick approach, but Batman would probably be a better fit for that, because Batman is naturally a very introspective, kind of dark.
Yeah. Robert Pattinson's Batman, I think, is the closest to what a Terrence Malick Batman would be like.
Yeah. No,
very moody. And he had the voiceovers, kind of like his own little journal entries whenever he was cruising around Gotham, especially like in that opening scene.
Yeah, I love that film. That's probably my favorite superhero movie of the last several years.
Yeah. So let's see. So back to the war movies. You have some that are even into recent conflicts, such as War on Terror, Iraq War, and there's a movie that's missing in here that I was wondering, why I was missing, or maybe you had written this article before you saw it, but The Covenant that came out, Guy Ritchie's The Covenant. Because to me, that is a movie that would fit perfect on this list in terms of a great war movie, just for like what you look for in that genre, but also one that hits some incredible themes in a really great way. So did you see that one? And is that one that...
No, yeah. I did see it, and I really liked it, and I actually thought about including it. I think the reason why I didn't is because it's not a true story. It's kind of an assemblage of like types of things that happened in terms of translators and the role that they played. But I just felt, I felt like that lowered the movie a little bit in my esteem, because there's so many great true stories from that war that could be told. So like, why kind of make it up? Even if the themes are great and even if the story is amazing, it lowered it a little bit in my mind, that it was just kind of like, let's write a script of a fake story, even though it could be something that might have happened. So anyway, that's the reason I didn't include it, but I did really love it, and there's some interesting theological themes in that film that I would love to like write about or talk about sometime. Even the title kind of tips us off that this movie has got some interesting ideas on its mind.
I saw it a month or two ago and absolutely loved it. I wanted to try to go back and see it again, but I didn't get the chance to, so I'll have to rent it and watch it at home. But like you said, it's right there in the title, that this movie is about a lot more than just shooting guns and blowing things up, which they've got a lot of that. And I thought the climax of the movie at the end it made me almost cheer, because it was one of the coolest climaxes whenever the day is finally won.
It was quite a thrilling movie. Like, I was on the edge of my seat. I don't take it for granted anymore that a movie that's released in 2023 is going to do that for me, because that kind of classic style of like filmmaking is a dying art form, but it was very gripping and engrossing and well acted. So I highly recommend it. It's one of those that you can walk away from and examine the relationships in your life in a different light, and kind of renew your commitment to the covenantal relationships in your life.
and question what debts do I owe that I haven't been paying relationally. You know, of course, not our like sin debt before God. We know Jesus Christ takes all that.
Right.
But yeah, I just thought that one was incredible. So yeah, so all the rest of these were based on true stories.
I don't know that all of them are, but I think most of them are.
Yeah.
Maybe Apocalypse.
Dunkirk. That's a true story, but you know the characters are fictional.
Yeah. A lot of these have fictional characters, but more or less follow the historical events.
Yeah.
1917 isn't historical necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I think the Covenant could have fit on there.
It could have.
If you do a second edition of the article.
Yeah.
All right.
It was on my like initial list of movies that I was going to include, but there were several that didn't make the cut. So the cut wasn't the only one.
Well, next year you can write 21 more war movies. Just do another list. But yeah, all right. Well, we're getting to the end of our time. Any last thoughts that you want to send off our listeners with, based upon what we've talked about today? Watching movies, watching these war movies, looking for themes, and taking them and reflecting on them for your life.
Yeah, I just think for 4th of July, like, pick one of these movies and watch it, and be grateful. That we live in a country where these sorts of sacrifices happened so that we can be here enjoying movies in relative safety and comfort, unlike in some parts of the world. So I think anytime a movie can make you feel grateful for things that you take for granted, whether it's family or your nationality and your freedom or anything really, like even like a movie like that really highlights the beauty of nature and the world that we live in, like those movies make me feel grateful that we live in this world that's so full of beauty and things that are good. And so I think war movies can help remind us of things to be grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. That's a great place to end. Well, Brett, thanks a lot for your time on the show today. For you guys who have been listening and enjoying this, and you want to go read the articles that we've mentioned, I'll have them linked in the show notes. The link to his his list of 21 war movies, as well as his latest article that talked about the multiverse ideas that we had talked about earlier. Both of those will be linked, so you can go find those in the show notes below. Well, like I said, Brett, it's been a long time coming, and I'm glad to finally get to have you on the show, get to talk and meet. It's been a great time, so thanks for joining us on Filter today.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Thanks for listening. I hope this episode provided you with biblical clarity to live with confidence in our confusing world. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch up the latest from me, you can go to my website, aaronchamp.com. While you're there, subscribe to my newsletter so that you can be updated anytime I share new content. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Aaron M. Champ. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Until then, hold fast.